Right. I hit the record button. Okay, great. Yeah, I think we can get started. And I'm quite excited to introduce our team. So Team Dooley received a BSc from Trinity College, Dublin in 1988 and a PhD from Royal Holloway, University of London in 1994. His research focused on physical modeling of geological processes in a variety of structural settings, whilst with the Fault Dynamics Research Group. He joined the Bureau of Economic Geology at the University of Texas at Austin in 2003, where he is the PI of the modeling laboratories at the Applied Geodynamics Laboratory and a senior research scientist within the Bureau. At the AGL, his work has focused on a variety of salt tectonic processes using innovative physical modeling and a variety of analytical and graphical techniques. He received the AAPG Jules Bernstein Memorial Award in 2009. And in his spare time, Tim also runs physical models of salt tectonic processes. Very interesting. Yeah, so without further ado, Tim, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much. So this is what I'm going to be speaking to you actually on this morning. It's actually on it's on growth and growth and evolution of canopies on a salt on a salt-detached slope, and actually obviously insights from actually analog models. Some of you have heard me. Some of you have heard me speak before, and actually others haven't, but you should actually understand I have an actual issue. So if things go south, I'll just aim at the screen. There is some excellent imagery actually in here. So without further ado, if I can get this to operate. Let me try something here. Okay, so before ending up on to the actual analog models, let's just have an actual intro to a salt canopy, and a salt canopy can be defined as composed of two or more salt sheets that have coalesced to form a composite salt body, and the areas in between these, get this again, and the actual areas between where these sheets have coalesced is called a suture. And here we actually have a physical model here. We happen to have our primary basins here that have sunk in, expelled salt actually upwards. This salt has climbed actually upwards on a series of ramps and flats here and coalesced here. The suture is in here. It's been torn. And this is an example from Gulf of Mexico. So we've got salt coming in from here, from an actual feeder actually out of this, actually out of plane here, and more salt coming in from over here out of plane, and salt coming up here. This feeder here has been pinched off here, and there are probably sutures somewhere in here and actually over here. So I'm not going to go into everything actually on here, but so sutures, the main areas I want you to take away from here is you generally have a high that separates each of our components salt sheets here. The suture line itself, the salt here came up, hit, climbed, and actually and salt sheet A actually overrode salt sheet salt sheet B here. Generally, what we see is that they do tend to override. Actually, they do tend to override each other down slope, but we will see that that isn't always the case. And here is a physical model actually showing an actual allo suture here, and it was angled so that we would have a suture with more maturity and actually override in the south here, and some areas that haven't sutured actually up here. Synoptic model actually over here showing this is actually an early stage, and this is actually at the end, which is what we have here, where the suture itself, which has entrained sediments here, has been bowed and has flexed downwards and been torn. And if we have a look at sections through that model, we see up here so we're ending up down here. So here we have the two sheets. They actually haven't collided here. They actually have here. There's just an upright suture here. Again, upright suture here, and then as we begin to override, we begin to tear that suture, and on onwards until it becomes awfully hard to actually trace that back up to our basal suture point. But we can obviously see our apical suture point here. And just two seismic actual examples here. One with well, I mean, it's still 6K, but a relatively small amount of override here. We can see clearly in here the suture in here with actually end trained sediments. And then here we have an awful lot of override, which is 17 or so kilometers. And you only see small areas in here and here and here that you can actually see the actual suture. Everything else you just have to draw lines to connect it up, and we cannot see our basal suture point here. But so far, the physical models I showed so far only only showed the upper part of the system, so only here. So there aren't any synkinetic sediments actually on here. And in reality, everything is obviously an awful lot more complex. And what we want to do is actually try to model some actually of that. So something like so, which is that this is a synoptic for Gulf of Mexico, showing the rise of salt all the way up from source layer up to shallow levels, and then being expelled actually upwards and actually outward. As I say here, I'm unable to end up at everything here. We can't do the absolute entire system here, but we will try to do some actually of that. And just for those of you who haven't actually ever ended up at animal modeling or haven't ended up in a lab, this is the setup I actually have here. So generally monitoring from overhead, single DSLR camera overhead, stereo CCD system, which is hooked up to a digital image correlation system that allows me to actually monitor everything X, Y, Z strains on this on that upper surface actually also. And as I say here, actually often I will put also a second camera actually underneath, because we can see upwards into the source layer, and we can see stuff like such as deep salt flows, structures actually at top salt that sometimes you aren't able to see on the actual that you can't sometimes see on the upper surface, and you will see some of that. And as everybody as with actually almost everybody, we use a viscous polymer here as our salt analog, and I can add actually in other paints actually in here, and we can I can add those into the source layer or into pre-built stocks, etc. And we can track flow, and then our overburden is primarily composed of silica sands and scenic sands, and I add actually in low. I add in low densities hemispheres actually into those sands. That helps in two ways. It helps to reduce overall grain size, and it also helps to moderate density actually of our actual overburden. And then, as with an awful lot of other labs, at the end of the model, the standard clay method, where we actually add gelatin solution actually in there. It sits for 18 hours or so, flip it over, put it up on here, and section it actually up. So I'm going to show you portions of two analog models here. Both of them had the same 14 feeder actual array. In model A, 6 star, 4 star, and 10 star here actually happened to have diameters twice the size as actually every other one. And in model B here, I actually had thicker horse layer. And you can actually see there in model A, there were kind of 3 main stages here. So vertical actual growth upwards, then flaring out and coalescence, and then adding on our prograding wedges actually afterwards. Model B here, again, a vertical, our early stage of vertical growth here, flaring outwards and coalescence. There was a short area of shortening in here, and then actually after that prograding out actually over our prograding out over our canopy system. So as I said, model A is split into 3 stages. So upward growth, flaring, and then after that canopy loading. And model B, as I said, 4 stages here. So upward growth, flaring, coalescence, shortening, and then after that canopy loading. So I'm going to show you a short overview of actually each of these, and then we will after that explore some aspects actually of each of these models. So just ending up on this model A here, and as you can see, these feeders here, 4 star, 6 star, 10 star, were actually larger. And here we are at the early stages with our stalks or feeders actually ending up upwards, beginning to flare out now, beginning to spread downslope, actually also beginning to suture up and form pretty patchy canopy system. And we will explore that actually afterwards. And here I'm just prograding out actually over this, and this stage ends up on and on and on, and you don't really see an awful lot. You can actually see some salt actual upwelling out here at the edges, at the downslope actual edge of the system here. So we will skip actually on that. I'm going to show you sections through here. They are going to run from north to south here. The salt has been in here. My salt here has been colored red, so it's actually easier to see. So we're going to go down. I'm going to go through feeder systems, and you can see just about all of them are are actually asymmetric. They flare down slope. So just having a look, here's the actual, here's the overhead view at the end of canopy formation stage here. And I'm just going to have a look at this system over here, E1 here. And here is a dip line, which is A here, and this is sheet, this is sheet 12 here, and you can just see the suture trail between sheet 12 and sheet 12 and 14 here. Here's basal suture point, and you can just about see the apical suture point here. And then here is an actual ARB line through 9, 12, and 14 here. So we actually have got salt flowing all of the way through the system here, all of the way to the edge of salt actually here. And what's obvious on here are basal suture points here, which are on highs actually at, which form highs actually, which form highs at base of the allotment salt. And then we strip out the salt from here. Here's our C1 canopy system, C2, and then just the other one, C3, C4, C5 here. And here we actually have a primary wells. You can actually see in here the heater systems. You can actually see them coming actually up. We've got some deflation here, and we can see inflation actually at the edges of these systems here. Right, okay, so model B then, let's have a look at the overhead, let's have a look at the early stage of this. You will note on here that some of these are faders 1 through 8 are actually elliptical in shape, and that was in order so that they would angle actually as they would angle over, they would lean seaward as they grew upwards. And I end up at that by putting it actually on a putting it on an actual early slope, and then all others all others then all just grew all others grew actually upright. So let's have a look at this. So you can see these are beginning to spread. This whole sheet's beginning to spread, beginning to suture in areas like here, beginning to suture over here, suturing here. So we actually have far more salt in the system here. And then at a kind of late stage here, what you see is that there's an awful lot of inward flow here, which we will explore afterwards. And then, as I said, we can also see things from actually from the underside. And so here we are having a look upwards through these horse layer, and it's actually up on a slope right now. And what we can see is our passive markers here beginning to flow downslope, then beginning to hook and being pulled actually up into our fader systems. You can see them ending up actually upwards here and here and here, and this one here beginning to flow actually inwards and actually upwards. So here we're gonna, this is model B, when I'm just gonna give it a small, just gonna shorten it by 12.5 centimeters here. And just take a look at what happens to our suture here. So we're squeezing, we're expelling salt actually upwards, and we are inflating the actual canopy system. Our suture here has moved all the way down slope. We can see salt here coming up from these horse layer here. And now we're going on to the actual, now we're going on to stage 4 here, where I'm adding on sand wedges here. So each wedge ends up out, pinches out here. I'm also going to be adding on sediments actually out here, outboard actually of the system. So we're just prograding out here. We're forming exponential mini basins in some of these areas, and then everything begins to seal off here, and everything moves outboard. We expel all that salt which was in here, has now been expelled upwards and actually outboard. And so once more, let's just have a quick look at a section fly through. So here's the overhead at the end shortening stage, but obviously at the end of I have added on all these extra wedges actually on top. So we're actually outboard. Here's the areas on the edge of the canopy shortening. Then we're into the canopy area. Here's our extensional mini basins here. Salt being expelled actually outboard and upwards all the way up in through here. And we will see that in a section on the next slide, etc. Okay, so just a kind of synoptic here. So here's the overhead pre-shortening here, post-shortening overhead here. Here's here's a slice through the actual model volume, which is indicated here. That's the height that you see it on there, and it's actually on here. And dip line through here, and an arb line that runs through here. And so our dip line shows, so here's fader 1, 5, 8, and we can see that we have squeeze shuttle. We have almost squeeze shut fader 5 here. Fader 8 is also shut. We've actually welded out, tertiary weld on here. We've expelled salt upwards and outboard from our first generation canopy system into a second generation canopy system up here. And you can see that that ends up actually outboard on these ramp areas here. Then our actual arb line here, we go through the edges of the canopy system with through the flanking thrust systems, then into our areas here showing trapped salt in fader 5 and fader 6 here. and out then again to the other edge of the actual canopy, actually out here. So, and then if I once more, if I extract the salt actually out from here, this is what we see: our fader systems here, our deflated first generation canopy system. Then we have this big seaward ramp, and then out into the second generation canopy system, actually out here. Okay, so I want to just explore some of the, some details through this, and these are going to be theme A through E here. Some of them overlap through the entire physical model. Some, such as subsalt, the subsalt, as here, subsalt thrust framework we only see in our second model, and it's only during the shortening stage. But I'm just going to go through actually each of these. And just having a look at model actually A here, and this is this we're talking about evolution of composite width of our composite width draw basin and regional well system. And here, these ones here, this is layer 4, layer 6, layer 8, layer 8 and 12 are actually shown here on the section on the left hand side here. So during our early stage, during our early stage upward diaper growth, our early isolated deep centers were actually centered on 4-star, 6-star, and 10-star. These were the 3 larger stocks actually in this system here. But you can actually see that we had subsidence actually all of the way actually out into the edges of the system here. And as we end up onwards onto layer 6, then these begin to coalesce here into 2 composite actual centers here, deeper centers. Then we begin to coalesce the entire actual we begin to form this a composite width draw basin, and this ends up actually onwards to here. And when we have a look at the end of the run, here is a deep section through model A, and we can see that we actually have we actually have a regional an actual regional. We have a primary well which is quite widespread here, and that primary well has strong implications for salt flow, because here's I've actually put it on the overhead. Here's the actual, here is the up-dip edge actually of that primary well. So actually outside of here, we can have an awful lot of flow within the source layer, but inside it, we don't have an awful lot of flow in these source layer, which explains why 6-star and 10-star here, as you can see on the vector map, are actually at this stage were actually almost inactive. They had effectively run out of salt. And you can see that from this, from here, displacements actually here show that, yes, on the edges, actually, on the edges, such as over here, as you see here, you can have flow, but an awful lot of the area inside is inactive. Okay. Now looking at looking at model B here, we can see that our substance, or our early stage substance here, isn't the same as we saw in A, and that's because it was always up on a slope here. So we actually had we actually had deep salt flow from the actual pulling out from it, the actual from the actual edge of the system, which was just actually which was just out here. But you can still see that substance is perturbed by our actual array here. And as we end up onwards, our substance here begins to more and more aim actually on this array, and actually edges out actually at the edge of the array until actually onwards when we're on layer 17 here, which is actually just up here. It's aimed actually on this in an A around our canopy system here. And just taking and just seeing an actual example actually of this process here. This is from onshore East Texas, and it's actually it's an actual isopac map of Aptian Albion, and it's the Glen Rose subgroup. And you can see that it is extremely thick here and actually over here, because these, well, especially Boggy Creek and the La Bru systems were extremely active at this time, and they were ending up upwards, growing upwards, taking salt out of this horse layer, and creating an awful lot of accommodation space. So now let's just actually talk about flow cells. And if we have a salt sheet if we have a salt sheet that spreads actually out over a flat, then often what you see is pure radial spreading actually, as you see here. The sheet has ended up spread actually out actually on a flat surface here. On the other hand, if you actually have this up on a slope, what you see are separate flow cells here in each. Well, actually, you know, here we actually have hooks actually up, but almost all of them are separate subradial. They tend to flare down slope, as you actually have actually on here. As we actually saw in our as we saw earlier in our model B here, towards the end of this, when I was adding on sediment actually outboard over here, which inhibited seaward spreading, but also when we had effectively run out of salt here, actually on the interior, we actually had all of this cross flow here. And that's because that's because at this stage, the relief actually at topsalt becomes extremely important, and actually flows into local and then begins to flow into local topographic loads within your canopy system. And here is just an example here. So A is here. So here is these Higsby Salt Canopy here. Our actual regional slope is actually down here to the south here, but here we actually have flow here, which is actually opposite to that slope, and same when we have a look over here. This is a seismic example here, which actually shows once more that our flow here is actually strongly oblique to our actual regional regional dip slope. And then when we have a look at the impact of also what we can do is see in model B here, what we're having a look here at is the impact of basalt rugosity actually on flow here. So this I'm showing vectors and displacement during the shortening stage here. And what we can see are a series of 3 salt streams here that hook up our feeder systems. And all of these are where our salt is actually, and here is where our salt is actually thicker than elsewhere. So this is where you've got areas of fast moving salt here. And as we thicken actually up, the flow within this system becomes a little bit more uniform, but it's still strongly impacted by the edge of the it's still strongly impacted by the edges actually of the canopy system. And just ending up on once more on flow cells here. So here we're just having a look at canopy, our canopy loading stage here, and what we can see here are our actual intra-canopy inflation, deflation, actual actual areas here. So we actually have we have salt being expelled from the actual up-dip edges in a heel toe scenario here, and as we end up actually onwards, we're on 17 and 21 here. But once more, what you see towards the end is deflation at the up-dip edge, inflation at the other edge. And we can see that in cross-section, actually also, this is the same one that you saw actually earlier on. Salt from sheet number, salt from salt sheet here, salt sheet 12 here being expelled into 14 here. And this is the suture you can actually see here. And again, this is this here is an example of intra-canopy our intra-canopy flow cell, and salt is being expelled from here. There's some inflation here, but then more salt being expelled from here and actually upwards out to the outer outer edge. And let's just have a look at these sutures. So we're on to theme C here. So we can see the beginnings of an actual allosuture here. This begins to actually override here. The same is happening here. What we also see here is flow that it is strongly actually it's actually almost opposite to our regional slope here, and we can see that our stock in here, our sheet in here, is being overridden from here, and it's being overridden from here. And that's just actually shown actually on here. Here we have here we have an actual fold belt here. We've got some expansion here as stuff spreads actually outwards. And then fold belt within here, 10 star, because it's being it is being overridden by 8 and 13 here. And let's just have a look at in our second model here. I'm adding on. I'm adding other paints actually on here as this evolves, and you can see the actual sutures themselves being actually being stretched out strongly actually as things evolve. And that's shown in actually here. So actually an early stage, some override here. There's hardly any override upright at the time upright here, and then it ends up onwards, begins to override, and it actually arcs actually in that override direction. And then what happens to all of these sutures during shortening here? Well, I've sketched actually out here. So it isn't easy to see, but all these sutures are actually all torn and stretched actually out as we shorten. We have intra-canopy flow here. And just an actual interesting one, I showed this actually earlier, where our sheet 10 star here was actually was being overridden from actually either side by 8 and 3rd and actually and 13. So actually at this time the suture would be somewhere out around here, actually arcing, and the suture here would be out around here. But at the end of the run, you can actually see that the sutures are out here and out here. So our actual suture between sheet 13 and 10, which before had been in here somewhere, has been turned inside out and pushed actually out to here, and you can just see the edges actually over here. And so, as I said, what actually happens to all these sutures here? Here we have the overhead model of model B after canopy formed, and then at the end of shortening here. So in here we can still see these sutures. Yes, they actually have been torn up, and that we can see. But then what happens at the end when I prograde actually out? Well, actually you can actually just see some fragments in here of sutures within here, but actually almost all of it is actually up in here, so right at the edge of the actual canopy system. So actually all sutures from here have been expelled all the way upwards, all along here and up into the edge of this, the edge of that, of that system. I showed the overhead actually of this of model B actually at the end of the shortening actually earlier on, and you actually see these. All you see from overhead is three or four flanking reverse faults actually out here, but you don't see an awful lot in the actual canopy system. But then when you have a look at the underside, actually after shortening, and there's a whole system of thrust and thrust tear faults that actually hook up actually all these structures on here. And even if you have a look at the planform of 14 here and 13, they are slightly elliptical to say that they actually had also been somewhat squeezed during the shortening. But you cannot see that from actually overhead, as I say. And if we have a look once more, model B here. So here is the depth slice is actually on here actually. So A prime here we end up through a subvertical tear faults actually here, and then outwards actually into the edge here, and then B prime we end up through fader 6 here, which is a steep thrust weld here, and then if you have a look at C prime, we actually happen to have an inclined thrust weld here and tertiary welding, and then again the D prime we actually have an well, a squeeze but open feeder system here, and an actual open feeder system here. And then on to the ending theme here. I just want to have a look at subsalt steep structures. And the first one that we see is the first one that we see actually the first thing we see are thrust wells, and these are characterized, as I say here, by an asymmetric pedestal, and also so asymmetric pedestal, and also at the upper level and at the upper level well, in here it's actually obvious, a pretty large keel actually at base at base canopy level. And so overall thrust wells are favored where the feeder was actually angled, where it was seaward inclined. The second one we're going to have a look at are what I call here non-thrust wells. So these they do have an obvious keel actually at base canopy level, small pedestal. There is little or no vertical offset, and these structures are actually favored when our feeders were actually upright. And here's an example here. And then just having a look at, if we actually have this is a physical model here, just showing a smooth base of salt here, a prograding wedge system, and salt is easily able to be expelled actually out of this system here. So you expel all your salt actually out. If on the other hand you have extremely rugose base of salt, it becomes harder to actually expel all of that salt out as parts of the system welled out actually on tertiary wells. And here we just showed tertiary wells here on pop-ups in here and in actual other areas. So here a tertiary weld on on what was before a basal suture point here. And so I just want to end here, and I just want to say that canopies, that salt canopies really do form some of the most spectacular and complex structures in the realm of salt tectonics. These do commonly form multi-tiered systems as salt is pumped actually outwards as salt is pumped upwards and then outwards, actually at multiple levels, and trying to tease apart multi-stage history actually of these systems just purely from seismic is actually awfully hard. But at least here, but here these physical models can offer insights into what types of structures to expect and actually how they formed. And this is just a kind of general area here, and I'm showing, and actually I'm showing by age, but I mean everybody told me that this was just a short-lived fad, and it would end, and here we are, still, well, ish, still going strong, actually. Some 30 years later, and I will end it there.
Great, thank you, Tim.
All right.
Beautiful, beautiful models as expected. So I can already see that we have some questions come flooding in. So I'll read a few questions. I'll start with the Q&A chat, and then we'll also read some questions from the other chat. So we have a question here, says from Oreo Erdi. He says, great presentation, Tim. I really enjoy your physical model illustrations. Can you tell me what might drive generation of the tear fault in your physical model? Does the evolution of the salt canopy influence down dip translations along strike, resulting in the formation of a tear fault?
Yeah, so generally it's because you are transferring, and I mean, I actually have I have an image here. You are transferring shortening actually outboard, right? So you're transferring shortening here, say from feeder number 6 to feeder number 9 here. And something has to happen something has to give within the country rock in order to maintain kinematic in actual order to maintain kinematic compatibility, and that overall is the tear fault here.
Yeah, great. So another question we have is, thanks, Dr. Dooley, for the interesting presentation. You mentioned earlier that the salt structures are complex in the Red Sea. How complex is that structures, and is it following model A or B? How is this salt structures will affect Red Sea plays and hydrocarbon exploration?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to say it's actually either or, but it isn't. I would say it's far more like, I would say that there are probably elements there that are more like model, that are more like model B, because obviously we formed because we actually happen to have more because we had more salt actually in there anyway, and that there is plenty of salt in the Red Sea. But the only thing is that we can't do that is present in the Red Sea is the presence of an extremely high heat flow. So we don't have that. We also don't have here any active drifting here. So the salt isn't flowing actually out and into something actually also. So
yeah, there's a few differences.
yeah.
Great. So another question we have from Herman Levitt says, what limited the salt canopy development? Was it the excess of salt supply or the closure of the feeders? That's the trick.
All right. Yeah. So overall in Model A, we actually just in the first model, we just ran out of salt. So, I mean, I could just, it ran for an absolute age and just went on and on and on. But then at some point, it just ended up actually out of salt. And almost all of that was after you, was after forming the primary weld. So you actually hadn't any you just hadn't any more salt to actually access. In the second model, obviously we actually had more, you know, I had more salt in there, so we actually had more salt to actually access.
Yeah. Okay, so we have next question is from Mark Rowan. It says, beautiful models as always, Tim. In your basal views, could you see what determines the fetch area of the source layer into each diapier? Midpoints between feeders, feeder diameter, or something else?
Yeah, I can say to you that I cannot be precise actually on that, because in order to be able to say that, I would have to have passive markers everywhere, or I would have to seed in some sand grains actually in there and to see that flow. Yes, the impact of but the impact of diapier diameter is obviously going to actually play a role actually in that. That will obviously increase your actual it will increase your fetch area, but at the same time, they are the ones that will also they tend to be the ones that also they're the ones that tend to start out awfully active, but do tend to die out, because they just take all that all that source layer out, and you actually form early welds then.
I had a question that was related to that actually, so maybe I'll just slip it in here before we keep going. On the question of feeder diameter, because that does seem to have quite an impact, as you were saying.
Yeah.
In the Gulf of Mexico, is there a large variability in the widths of the diapirs, or is it hard to tell what the original width of the diapier is because of the later squeezing?
Yeah, it's pretty. It actually is. I mean, Europe. Yeah, I mean, I would say that all I would say there is that you can't really tell. You know, you probably have some. You may have some sort of you know, there are some aspects of things that would help you out, but also you have to remember that these aren't. But also you have to remember that, you know, you also have to remember these aren't isolated. You know, they form here, there, actually everywhere.
Yeah, there's a lot of interaction.
Yeah.
Okay, the next question. Oh no, that was by Mohammed Abdel Fattah about the Red Sea. So we read that one.
Okay.
Gopal Amruthapuri said, great presentation, Tim. Catherine Giles is asking, great talk, Tim. I could stare at your models all day. A lot of love for the models. Did you control shortening or sediment amount to induce ramp flat geometry? And do the ramps and flats come in at the same horizons?
Yeah, so I can kind of answer that by here, looking at it here. Yes, I mean, because I was adding sediments outboard. So overall, during shortening, which is which occurred from here. So if you can actually see, there's a ramp here, there's a flat, there's a ramp sort of coming actually up. So they form because you actually add sediments actually on there, and in the same area, you form. Let me see if I can just go to this other one here. In the same way here, as these things begin to spread out, I had to create space into which they would flow actually into. So it's kind of 50% they happen because you add on the sediment, and 50% you also hand it the space into the space into which it can expand into, right? So yeah, it's overall it's pretty fake, but I mean sure, I mean that's how you always have to end up at. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, sure. Okay, then we have Scott Kruger says, great models, Tim. I really missed the AGL meeting since I retired 5 years ago. Keep up the good work. Rasmus Stenhove says, very well done, Tim. Thank you so much. Herman Levitt, thanks, Tim. Very interesting presentation indeed. Spectacular models. Mana Sahu, insightful models, Tim. Carlos Luzada, lots of compliments here. Thank you for your presentation. Great overview of the models, very useful analogs. Gamal Amiesh, good work. Thanks, Tim. Zoltan Unger, thanks for the models, but maybe some models remain only model. These efforts performing the models is wonderful.
True.
Yeah, David Thomas, fascinating and insightful work you're doing. Great talk. Thanks. Kurt Trollstarp, really good work. It's so nice to see how the inclusion of additional colored powders can enhance the ease of understanding structural evolution. Yeah, I agree. It makes it very clear to see the different generations.
Yeah.
Cobra, great talk. Thank you. Andres Pesh, excellent presentation. The combination of this type of geological model with ultrasonic modeling can give rise to extremely powerful tools for interpretation. Definitely. Josep Munoz, thank you for the nice talk, Tim, for showing the nice models. In Model B, how contractional deformation from the thrust system is transferred into the canopy?
Well, if you actually saw from actually overhead, you cannot see an awful lot. So what you get is you actually get an awful lot of inflation here as salt is actually as salt is expelled upwards and as the whole thing begins to shorten. But then when you actually have a look at what's actually happening in here, there's an awful lot happening. Actually, there is an awful lot happening. There's an awful lot happening at the sub canopy level, actually, anyway, which you can only see actually which you can only see either or from the underside or at the end of the model after you chop it actually up.
All right, yeah. Okay, so plenty more compliments in the chat. I think I'll let you read through those afterwards. We have another couple of questions in the Q&A though. So from Ken Beckman, we have outstanding presentation, which provides thought-provoking ideas for solving previously unsolvable seismic problems. Seems the next step is to model carbonates in the overburden for the Kwanza Basin and other areas with less pliable overburden. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Plenty, yeah.
Yeah, it actually is. Yeah, I mean, obviously there's an awful lot that we aren't able to actually end up at, but there are things that we are able to end up at. But I think something like so is probably I think something like so is probably best done through new. I think probably best done through new. I think it'd be easier to do in new empirical models. You know, where you can actually where you can end up at over and actually over, and you know, well, where you kind of easily end up at over and over and actually iterate. So,
yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, some problems can be solved physical models and some better suited to numerical, I guess. Yeah. Okay, and I think we should make this the final question then, one more in the Q&A. Thank you for the presentations. I have two questions. Okay, final two questions then. From your experience, is it possible to model fragile deformations of salt overburden, a model where overburden is uplifted, faulted to several blocks and displaced to the sides of the diapier? What kind of materials could possibly be used to model fragile overburden?
Okay, so I would answer that I actually have ended up at that. There actually are, and I can send you on some info actually on that afterwards. You can still end up at it just by sands. I mean, it, you know, all it has to be is that the overburden has to be all that you actually have to have is a pretty pretty thin actual overburden that is actually able to be that can be pushed actually up and actually out.
Yeah, okay. And then final question, are there estimates of the initial thickness of autochthonous salt for the Gulf of Mexico?
Yeah, anywhere from 2.5 kilometers to about 4, I think, is the upper limit. I think, and it isn't the same. It isn't the same. It isn't the same. It isn't the same. It isn't the same everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, great. Then I think that's it, and we can send you the chat so you have many more comments in there, but it would take too long to read them all. So
Sure.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much, Tim, and thank you everyone for attending. This was actually our last talk of the year for the Salt Basins webinars. So Tim had a very beautiful presentation to close us out with lots of nice images, which is great. And do keep updated via our mailing list and also our Twitter for updates of what we will be doing next year. Otherwise, I hope you'll have very good holidays, whatever you'll be doing, and we'll see you in 2022. Okay, thank you, everyone. Bye.
All righty.